every depression is a messenger? Jung on the hidden meaning of mental illness. What if I told you that depression isn't something to be cured, but something to be heard? Sounds crazy, right? I mean, if you've ever experienced depression or watched someone you love struggle with it, your first instinct is to make it stop, to fix it, to get back to normal as quickly as possible. But Carl Jung, one of the most revolutionary minds in psychology, had a completely different perspective that might just change how you think about mental health forever. Jung believed that depression, and pretty much every psychological symptom we experience, isn't just a random chemical malfunction or a disease to be eliminated. It's actually a messenger from your unconscious mind, desperately trying to tell you something important about your life. And here's the wildest part. According to Jung, rushing to cure these symptoms without understanding their message is like shooting the messenger. It doesn't just miss the point, it destroys a precious opportunity for growth and transformation that might never come again. I know this sounds completely backwards compared to how we usually think about mental health, but stick with me, because what I'm about to share could completely transform how you understand not just depression, but all kinds of psychological struggles. So let's dive into Jung's revolutionary perspective and discover why your darkest moments might actually contain the seeds of your greatest breakthrough. Jung discovered something fascinating during his decades of working with patients. He noticed that when people experienced depression, anxiety, or other psychological symptoms, these weren't random. They almost always appeared at moments when a person's conscious attitude or life direction was somehow out of alignment with their deeper needs or potential. Depression, in particular, seemed to show up when someone was living in a way that was disconnected from their authentic self, like they were following a path that wasn't truly theirs, or denying important aspects of who they really were. Think about it this way. Imagine you're driving a car on a road trip. Your conscious mind is at the wheel, making all the decisions about where to go. But what if you're heading in a direction that's completely wrong for you? How would your deeper self, the part of you that knows what you really need, get your attention? Well, it might start by making you feel uneasy. If you ignore that, it might make you feel anxious. And if you continue to ignore these signals, it might eventually hit the emergency brake. Depression. A complete shutdown that forces you to stop and reconsider your direction. This is exactly how Jung viewed depression. Not as a malfunction, but as an emergency response when your life has gone off track in some fundamental way. I remember talking to this friend of mine. Let's call him Mike. He had this really successful corporate career, making great money, getting promotions. But he started experiencing crippling depression. His doctor immediately put him on antidepressants, which helped dull the feelings, but the emptiness remained. It wasn't until Mike started therapy and really exploring what was happening that he realized something profound. He absolutely hated his job. Not just disliked it, hated the values of his company, hated what he was contributing to the world, hated who he was becoming as a person. His depression wasn't a chemical imbalance. It was his authentic self screaming at him that he was living someone else's life. Now, am I saying all depression is just being in the wrong job? Absolutely not. The message can be about anything. A relationship that's not working, a creative talent that's been suppressed, a trauma that needs processing, or spiritual needs that aren't being met. The point is that depression often contains a message about something important that needs to change. Jung put it this way: depression is like a long winter darkness in which the soul withdraws into itself, examining and reorganizing its interior. It's like a forced retreat, painful, yes, but potentially transformative if we're willing to listen to what it's trying to tell us. But here's the problem with our modern approach to mental health. We often focus exclusively on eliminating symptoms as quickly as possible without ever asking what they might mean. It's like if your car's check engine light comes on, and instead of looking under the hood to see what's wrong, you just cover the light with tape. Sure, you don't have to see the warning anymore. But is the problem solved? Of course not. Jung saw this approach as not just missing the point, but potentially harmful. He wrote, "We cannot change anything until we accept it. Condemnation does not liberate, it oppresses." When we rush to condemn our psychological symptoms as nothing but problems to eliminate, we might be oppressing the very parts of ourselves that are trying to guide us toward healing and wholeness. Now, I want to be crystal clear about something. I am not saying medication is bad or that conventional treatment doesn't help. Medications can be literal lifesavers that provide relief and stability so that deeper work can happen. The problem isn't medication itself. It's stopping there and never asking what the depression might be trying to communicate. Let's talk about something Jung called the night sea journey. His metaphor for the descent into the darker, unconscious aspects of ourselves that often accompanies depression. In mythology across cultures, there are stories of heroes who must descend into the underworld or journey through darkness before they can be transformed and return with new gifts. Jung saw depression as potentially serving a similar function in our lives. Yes, it's painful. Yes, it's frightening. But it can also be the beginning of a profound inner journey that leads to a more authentic and meaningful life. The key difference between someone who is just suffering through depression and someone who is transforming through it often comes down to one thing: meaning. When we can find meaning in our suffering, when we can understand it as part of a larger process of growth and transformation, it becomes more bearable and even potentially valuable. This reminds me of something Viktor Frankl, another brilliant psychologist who survived the Nazi concentration camps, once said, "Those who have a why to live can bear almost any how." Finding the meaning in our depression, the message it carries, can give us that why. So what might depression be trying to tell us? While every person's experience is unique, Jung observed some common themes. Sometimes depression comes when we've been living too much in our persona, the mask we show to the world, and have lost touch with our authentic self. The depression is calling us back to genuineness. Other times, depression appears when we've been ignoring our shadow, the parts of ourselves we've rejected or denied. The depression is pushing us to integrate these disowned aspects. Depression can also signal that we're stuck in old patterns that no longer serve us, or living according to other people's expectations rather than our own inner truth. And sometimes, particularly in midlife, depression arrives when we've achieved all the external goals society told us to chase, only to discover they don't bring fulfillment. The depression is inviting us to discover a deeper sense of purpose. I remember working with this woman, a high-powered executive who had accomplished everything she'd ever set out to do by age 40. Great career, beautiful family, perfect house, and then boom, crippling depression that seemed to come out of nowhere. As she worked through it, she realized she'd been so focused on external achievements that she'd completely neglected her spiritual life and deeper questions of meaning. Her depression was literally forcing her to develop the neglected spiritual dimension of her personality, something she never would have prioritized otherwise. Now, years later, she says that depression was the most painful, but also the most valuable experience of her life. It completely transformed her relationship with herself and others, and led her to a much richer, more balanced way of living. This kind of transformation is what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming more fully yourself, integrating all the different aspects of your personality into a unique and authentic whole. And depression, as painful as it is, can sometimes be a crucial catalyst for this process. Now, let's talk about something really important that Jung understood. Depression doesn't always have a single, simple message you can just decode like a fortune cookie. Sometimes it's complex, layered, even contradictory. And sometimes accessing its meaning requires working with symbolic thinking rather than just logical analysis. This is why Jung placed so much emphasis on dreams, imagination, and creative expression as ways to understand our psychological symptoms. Our unconscious mind often communicates through images and symbols rather than straightforward statements. Working with these symbols through art, writing, active imagination, or dream analysis can help us access the meaning our depression is trying to convey. I remember one guy who started painting during his depression with no prior artistic experience. The images that came out were dark, chaotic, painful to look at, but they helped him express and eventually understand emotions he couldn't put into words. Those paintings became a bridge between his conscious mind and the unconscious forces behind his depression. Over time, he noticed the imagery in his paintings gradually shifting, becoming more integrated, even occasionally hopeful. The changes in his art actually preceded improvements in his mood, like his unconscious was working through something visually before his conscious mind caught up. That's the power of working symbolically with depression. It creates a dialogue between your conscious and unconscious mind, allowing for communication and eventual integration. But I can already hear some of you saying, "This all sounds nice, but depression is a serious medical condition with biological factors. You can't just philosophize it away." And you're absolutely right. Jung never denied the biological aspects of mental illness. In fact, he was a medical doctor who understood the physical dimensions of psychological suffering. The key is that Jung saw beyond the false dichotomy between biological and psychological explanations. He understood that we are complex beings where mind, body, and spirit are constantly interacting. Physical factors can trigger psychological responses, and psychological patterns can create physical changes in the brain. Modern research actually supports this integrated view. We now know about neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize itself based on experience. Therapy and medication don't have to be opposing approaches. They can work together with medication providing symptom relief that creates space for the deeper psychological work. What Jung would caution against isn't medication itself, but the belief that addressing brain chemistry alone is sufficient without engaging with the psychological meaning of our symptoms. So how do we actually put Jung's insights into practice? If depression and other psychological symptoms are messengers, how do we learn to hear what they're trying to tell us? First, it requires a fundamental shift in attitude. From seeing depression as just an enemy, to be defeated, to seeing it as a difficult but potentially valuable process that contains meaning. This doesn't mean glorifying suffering or passively accepting it, but rather approaching it with curiosity. What might this experience be trying to teach me? Second, it involves creating space for reflection and inner work. This could be through therapy, journaling, creative expression, meditation, or dream work. Practices that help us connect with our deeper selves and listen to what's emerging from the unconscious. Third, it means paying attention to timing. Sometimes the most profound insights about our depression come not during its darkest moments, but in the spaces between, or even after we've begun to emerge from it. Being patient with the process is essential. And fourth, it requires courage. The courage to potentially make real changes in our lives based on what we discover. If your depression is telling you that your job is crushing your soul, or your relationship is fundamentally unhealthy, or you've been denying an important part of yourself, acting on these insights might mean making difficult decisions. Jung himself put it this way: there is no coming to consciousness without pain. The path through depression toward greater wholeness isn't easy, but many find it ultimately more fulfilling than simply returning to the same state of consciousness that preceded the depression. Of course, this approach isn't one size fits all. The severity of depression varies enormously, and in acute cases, ensuring basic stability and safety has to come first. Sometimes medication is absolutely necessary to create enough functional capacity for any meaningful psychological work to happen. The key is not rejecting conventional treatment, but complementing it with a deeper exploration of meaning. The two approaches can, and often should, work together. I'm reminded of something one therapist told me. Medication can help you get out of the hole, but it can't tell you which direction to walk once you're on solid ground again. Finding meaning in our depression helps us know which direction to walk. Now, I want to talk about something Jung called the healing fiction. He recognized that we may never know with absolute certainty what our depression means in some objective sense. But he believed that finding a meaning that resonates deeply with us, a story that makes sense of our suffering, has healing power in itself, whether or not it's objectively true. This isn't about making up convenient explanations. It's about deeply reflecting on our experience and discovering interpretations that ring true at a gut level, that create that aha feeling of recognition. When we find this kind of meaningful narrative for our depression, it transforms our relationship with the experience. Instead of being just a senseless affliction, it becomes a chapter in our larger life story, perhaps even a pivotal one that leads to important growth. I've seen this countless times, how differently people relate to their depression when they can place it within a meaningful context rather than experiencing it as random suffering. It doesn't make the pain disappear, but it makes it bearable in a different way. It becomes pain with a purpose. One of the most powerful aspects of Jung's approach is that it gives us back a sense of agency. When depression is seen as nothing but a disease that happens to us, like catching a virus, we become passive recipients of treatment. But when we engage with depression as a meaningful experience that's telling us something important about our lives, we become active participants in our own healing process. This shift from passivity to engagement can be transformative in itself. Many people report that simply beginning to work with their depression in this way, asking what it might be trying to communicate, creates a subtle but important shift in their experience. The depression doesn't immediately disappear, but their relationship with it changes. They're no longer just victims of a senseless affliction, but explorers of their own inner landscape. And this brings us to another crucial insight from Jung: the idea that psychological symptoms often contain not just problems, but also potential solutions. He believed that within the symptom itself, if we listen carefully enough, we can find clues to the path forward. It's like the depression contains both the poison and the antidote. But accessing that healing potential requires us to engage with the symptom rather than just trying to eliminate it as quickly as possible. I remember this one client who had recurring nightmares during a period of depression. Instead of just trying to make the nightmares stop, she began writing them down, drawing images from them, and reflecting on what they might be trying to show her. Over time, she realized the nightmares were revealing aspects of herself she'd been suppressing, particularly her anger, which she'd been taught was unacceptable for a woman to express. As she found healthier ways to acknowledge and express this anger in her waking life, the nightmares gradually transformed. The same figures that had been threatening began to appear as allies. The dreams were literally showing her the path through her depression, once she learned how to listen to them. This idea that our symptoms contain their own medicine is one of Jung's most hopeful insights. It suggests that even in our darkest moments, the potential for healing is already present within us, if we can learn to recognize and work with it. Now, let's address something important. Jung's approach doesn't blame people for their depression or suggest they've somehow brought it on themselves. That would be a gross misunderstanding of his perspective. Jung had deep compassion for psychological suffering and never minimized its severity or suggested it was someone's fault. What he did believe is that depression often emerges from the tension between our conscious attitudes and deeper aspects of ourselves that we've neglected or suppressed. This isn't about blame. It's about understanding the dynamic relationship between different parts of our psyche. Jung also recognized that cultural factors play a huge role in psychological suffering. He was deeply critical of modern society's materialism, its disconnection from nature and community, and its neglect of spiritual needs. He saw many forms of depression as appropriate responses to a culture that fails to nourish authentic human development. In this light, depression can sometimes be understood as a form of resistance, the psyche's refusal to adapt to unhealthy cultural norms. It becomes not a sign of weakness or failure, but potentially an indicator of psychological integrity. The self's refusal to be contorted into shapes that don't allow for genuine expression and growth. This perspective can be incredibly liberating for people who've been made to feel that their depression is a personal failing or weakness. It reframes their suffering as a meaningful, even necessary response to genuine tensions within themselves or between themselves and their environment. So where does this leave us? Is Jung suggesting we should welcome depression? Of course not. Depression involves real suffering that no one would choose. But he is suggesting that when depression arrives, we have a choice in how we relate to it. And that choice can make all the difference in whether it becomes just a period of suffering or a catalyst for important growth. The difference lies in whether we can ask, what is this depression trying to tell me? What aspects of myself or my life might need attention or change? What values or needs have I been neglecting? What old patterns might I need to release? These questions don't guarantee immediate relief. The journey through depression often remains difficult and painful, but they can transform it from meaningless suffering into a challenging but potentially valuable process of self-discovery and renewal. Jung himself experienced a profound period of psychological crisis, what we might now call depression, after his break with Freud. Rather than just trying to escape his disturbing thoughts and feelings, he engaged with them through writing, drawing, and active imagination. This difficult period became the foundation for his most important theoretical contributions and his own psychological development. Looking back on it, he wrote, "The years when I was pursuing my inner images were the most important in my life. In them, everything essential was decided." His willingness to engage with his own psychological crisis, rather than just trying to eliminate it, led to his most profound insights and developments. Now, I want to be really clear about something. I'm not suggesting that severe, life-threatening depression should be faced without professional help or appropriate medical treatment. Safety always comes first, and sometimes medication and hospitalization are absolutely necessary. But even within conventional treatment approaches, Jung's perspective offers something valuable: the possibility that our psychological symptoms, painful as they are, might contain important messages about our lives and development. Working with qualified professionals who understand this deeper dimension of psychological suffering can make a world of difference. So here's the takeaway. Depression isn't just something to get rid of as quickly as possible. It's potentially a messenger carrying important information about your life and development. By learning to listen to what it might be trying to tell you, alongside appropriate treatment, you may discover not just relief from symptoms, but a path toward greater wholeness, authenticity, and meaning. As Jung himself put it, there is no birth of consciousness without pain. Depression can sometimes be the painful birth process of a new level of awareness and a more authentic way of being in the world. If you found this perspective valuable, please hit that like button and subscribe for more content that explores the depths of human psychology. Every day, we dive into topics that challenge conventional wisdom and offer new perspectives on what it means to be human. Until next time, remember that even your darkest moments might contain the seeds of transformation. The question is, are you willing to listen to what they're trying to tell you?